Joining me now is President Obama's former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and a presidential candidate, Julian Castro. Mr. Castro, good to see you. Let me start right there.
Good to see you.
On this fact check, because one of the things you said after the debate was you were trying to fact check the president. These fact checkers basically said you got your facts wrong. Do you want to clarify? I was just going to say, let me give you an opportunity. Do you want to respond to the fact checkers, clarify anything you said last night?
I had a chance to look at that. I think they missed the mark completely. In fact, as I understand, one of the things that they said was that the fact that people would have to fill out paperwork under Vice President Biden's plan versus not having to do anything is basically inconsequential. It doesn't amount to anything. I mean, I don't know who they hire at PolitiFact, but it's obviously not somebody that's ever dealt with a working family or the practical realities of why people fall off of insurance or other things where there's an onerous process. So, I do take issue with that. And last night,
you think there's a big difference between his paperwork and your paperwork? I mean, your plans are okay. One's opt out, one's opt in.
And that's a big difference.
Okay, I get it. You say it's a big difference from 30,000 feet and from the difference between what you guys are arguing about and Donald Trump is trying to undo Obamacare completely. It looks like a petty difference.
Well, look, as I pointed out, last time in Detroit, when we were on the debate stage, Senator Harris said that his plan would leave out 10 million people, leave 10 million people uncovered. So I pointed out that, it would leave 10 million people uncovered. At that time, Vice President Biden in Detroit said, no, it wouldn't. The news media actually did the research, and they said, actually, yes, his plan would leave 10 million people uncovered. So I pointed that out. To me, 10 million people uncovered is not inconsequential, whether you're looking at it from 30,000 feet or you're looking at it from right at ground level. That's a lot of people. Right now, there are over 27 million people who are uncovered. There would still be 10 million people uncovered under Vice President Biden's plan. And this was a disagreement about health care policy. People can try and make it whatever they want. But he said very clearly that some folks would have to buy in. I said, you just said that. And he said, no, they wouldn't have to buy in. That's why I said, look, it seems like you're forgetting that you just said, that some people would have to buy in. And he did say that.
And he also said that there would be people that would automatically get enrolled in his answer, too. I mean, that was heard. I mean, for what it's worth, he did say that in his initial answer.
No, he was denying. He said very clearly that if you lose your job, that you can automatically buy in to his plan. Folks need to catch the significance of that. Yeah. That would mean that a lot of people would be left uncovered. So, this is what these debates are for. We're having a disagreement about something that's very important.
Let's go to the issue of the perception problem that you may be facing today. I understand you believe you were not issuing a personal attack. That's not what Amy Klobuchar heard. It feels like something Donald Trump might tweet, she said. It's not what Cory Booker heard. When you demonize somebody and create bad blood, it's hard to unify afterwards. It's not what Beto O'Rourke heard. That kind of personal attack, I don't think, is what we need right now and is insufficient to the challenges we face. Forget what you intended. If 3 of your colleagues, all of whom I think you are in very good and personal friendly terms with, believe what you did sounded like a personal attack, do you now look at it and go, well, maybe I should have used different words?
Not at all. Look, we're up there to debate, and that's what I was doing. I pointed out that Vice President Biden's plan would leave out 10 million people. I think that's significant, and so I would point that out again.
I'm curious, you put out a fundraising email that said, I spent every second on last night's debate stage fighting for you, and now I'm being viciously attacked for it. I spent every second on that stage fighting for you, and now I'm being attacked for it. Twice you put this in your fundraising email. Do you feel like the victim here?
No, what I see is that there are a lot of people who are defending a plan that would leave 10 million people uncovered, and I believe that the vision of President Obama and what we want to get to in this country is every single person who has the access to health care and gets good health care in our country, not 10 million people who are covered. So I'm willing to fight that fight, Chuck. I'm going to stand up for changing our health care system to a system where everybody gets covered, not leaving 10 million people out. That's very significant, and I'll fight for that. I'll fight for that every single day.
You're not questioning that. You repeated the word forget so many times that a lot of people thought this was a planned hit. and that
it was not. Look, I respect Vice President Biden. I've known Vice President Biden now for years. Of course, served in the Obama administration with him. I think that in many ways he's a good candidate. That's going to be up for the voters to decide. What I was pointing out was that he had denied saying the words buy-in, even though he did say the words buy-in, and that's significant to leaving 10 million people uncovered. So, like I said, I am willing to have that conversation about whether we should cover everybody or we should leave 10 million people in this country uncovered every single day of the week. Look, I'm in this race to fight for what I believe in and to fight for the most vulnerable people in our country. And I'm not going to back down on that. I don't care what the D.C., Washington establishment says. I'm going to fight for the people who need fighting for in this campaign, win or lose.
Let me move on to another topic that you took. You went out of your way to make sure you were answering a moderator's question that Senator Sanders didn't. And it was on the issue of Venezuela. And he was asked about why he wouldn't refer to Maduro as a dictator. Bernie Sanders went on to call him a tyrant. Never did say whether or not he didn't sort of address the dictator question. You jumped in. In fact, let me play the bite.
You admit that Venezuela does not have free elections, but still you refuse to call Nicolás Maduro un dictador, a dictator. Can you explain why? And what are the main differences between your kind of socialism and the one being imposed in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Anybody who does what Maduro does is a vicious tyrant. In terms of democratic socialism, to equate what goes on in Venezuela with what I believe is extremely unfair.
Secretary Augusto, you wanted to say a quick response, 45 seconds.
Sure. Thank you, Jorge. I'll call Maduro a dictator because he is a dictator.
You jumped right in on that. What do you believe is the difference between tyrant and dictator? Because obviously, I know you believe words matter. And in this case, Jorge Ramos believed words mattered here.
Well, I mean, what do you call somebody who hijacks the nation's constitution, tries to usurp as much power as he can, mistreats political enemies and the press? Maduro is a dictator, and we have to be willing to call that out. And
you think
so
that was a mistake? You think that was a mistake by Senator Sanders that he wouldn't do that? And look, I think Senator Sanders would say, look, he hesitates doing that because he's, I think, on foreign policy, he says, look, there's only so much we should get involved in on foreign policy.
I don't know. I haven't had that conversation with Senator Sanders, and frankly, haven't followed all of what he said on the issue of Venezuela. All I know is what I see in Maduro and what I believe that we need to do, which is to support free and fair elections and make sure that the Venezuelan people are able to get the humanitarian assistance they need. And this is the other thing I pointed out in that answer, Chuck, that was very significant. Donald Trump likes to act like he's a friend of Venezuelans who are here in the United States and need temporary protected status. I would sign an executive order or support legislation to actually give TPS, or temporary protected status, to Venezuelans who need it. That is something that this administration has not been willing to do. In fact, it's taken a bipartisan effort in Congress to move legislation forward. So as big a game as Donald Trump talks, especially when he's down there in Florida trying to court the South Florida vote, he hasn't lifted a finger for those Venezuelans who are here who need his help.
Final question. A lot of the other moment that's been made is the other Texan in the race, and it was Beto O'Rourke talking about, yes, he wants to take your AR-15 away, and that it's time to get rid of him. Where are you on this in general? And I'm just curious, as a Texan, how will this play in Texas?
Well, I started last night one of my answers by complimenting Congressman O'Rourke, because I do think that he's done a wonderful job of articulating the frustration and also the grief and the sadness that so many Americans have had after what happened in El Paso, what happened in the Permian Basin in Texas and other places. I support common sense gun safety legislation, from universal background checks to banning assault weapons to a 7-day waiting period, a licensing requirement. And I'm willing to hear the arguments on mandatory background checks, but I would like to see us do those other things first, because I think that we can actually get those done.
All right, Julian Castro, I will leave it there. Thank you for coming on, sharing your views. Stay safe on the trail, sir. You got it. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.